In a small American rural town, David lives with his abusive father William, but without his mother who left them when he was 5. At school, David likes to hang out with his crush Millie, who dreams of traveling around the world. David knows about this, and one day, he presents Millie with a snow globe with the Eiffel Tower in it. But the sweet moment is interrupted by Mark, who taunts David for being a nerd and throws the snow globe in the middle of a frozen lake. Although Millie warns him against doing so, David decides to retrieve it. But the ice is not thick enough to withstand his weight and breaks. The frozen current drags him underwater, and David panics to the point he suddenly finds himself in the middle of a library. Confused and disoriented, he decides to ignore what just happened and goes home. William immediately begins telling him off for being late, so David hides in his room. Furious, William begins pushing the door, and when he's about to burst in, David disappears and shows up in the library again. Accepting that he has superpowers, David returns home to grab his savings and leaves to start a new life. But not before he stops by Millie's house to leave the snow globe, so she knows he's alive and well. Next, David moves to the city, where he rents a small room at a motel and begins putting his powers to the test. The first number of times he ends up crashing into a tree, but he starts to get the hang of it and looks at photos of the places he wants to go to. His first visit is to the Empire State Building, where he has fond memories of his mother Mary. When he's all set, David goes to a bank to see what it looks like from within. During the evening, he teleports inside the vault to steal a large amount of the money and celebrates in his room. The next day, the bank discovers the robbery, and Roland shows up pretending to be NSA. Having had experiences with similar cases, he knows the existence of jumpers and is sure one of them did this. 8 years pass and David is living the life. He owns a luxurious penthouse apartment in New York filled with expensive items and has gained such mastery of his powers that he uses them for anything. His walls are full of photos of landmarks that allow him to easily teleport to places he wants to go to, like having breakfast in Egypt. One evening, he goes to London, where he teleports to a pub to pick up a girl, but this recklessness is noticed by Griffin, another jumper. But David doesn't pay it any mind and leaves with the girl. Somewhere else, a jumper teleports in the middle of a jungle, where he gets caught in a net of electrical wires that neutralize his powers. This trap was set up by Roland and his men. They're known as the Paladins and hunt down jumpers because they view them as an atrocity. Roland puts the boy down and then gets a call about his next lead. Sometime later, David returns home to find Roland there, who has brought all the evidence David left during his bank robberies throughout the years. David tries to make him leave, but Roland responds by hitting him with a baton that shocks him with large amounts of electricity that prevents David from jumping further than a few feet inside his apartment. After lots of struggling, David manages to teleport within a hidden room inside his wall and cuts the baton cable. Roland follows the cable line and starts breaking the wall down, but David grabs some bags of money and jumps away in time. Not giving up, Roland inspects the photos and sends his men to all of David's jump sites before looking through his stuff and finds an old photograph of Millie. Meanwhile, David appears in his old room. William hears a noise from upstairs and rushes to try to meet with his son, saying he feels like he's crazy and that David is welcome to come home anytime. But David only assures William that he isn't crazy before disappearing again. The next morning, David considers visiting his father, but can't bring himself to do it. Instead, he goes to Millie's house, and Millie's mother is so happy to learn that David is alive that she hugs him. She also tells him that Millie is working at the local bar, and David goes there. But he gets cold feet as soon as he sees her and tries to leave without being noticed, and bumps into an older Mark, who immediately recognizes him and begins asking questions. His announcement is overheard by Millie, who reveals that she saw David when he arrived and was waiting for him to say something. This makes Mark envious, so he tries to hit on her, causing David to punch him, and the confrontation escalates into a fight outside, where he seizes the chance to shove Mark through the fence and teleport him away when no one is looking. They reappear inside one of the banks David previously robbed, where he leaves Mark behind as a form of payback. After that, David returns to catch up with Millie and learns that she still dreams of traveling around the world, so he invites her to come with him to Rome, while revealing that he works as a banker, and she accepts. All of this is overheard by Griffin, who is also in the bar. Meanwhile, Roland arrives at the police station masquerading as CIA and knocks out the detective when he isn't believed. He speaks to Mark, assuring that he believes his story about teleportation and thankful to have found an ally. Mark tells Roland everything. Roland calls his men and orders them to prepare for their mission in Italy. Meanwhile, David and Millie arrive in Rome and check into a luxurious hotel before they go to enjoy the sight of the city, while Griffin observes from afar. Their sightseeing eventually leads them to the Colosseum, only to find it closed for the day. While Millie is momentarily distracted, David teleports inside to unlock the side door and pretends it was already open. The couple wanders through the historic site, marveling at the scenery with David pulling the same trick whenever they discover a locked door. David jumps to the lower area to find Griffin relieving himself on a pillar but doesn't pay him any mind. But Griffin suddenly teleports in front of him and reveals there are jumpers all over the world. He then scolds David for bringing a non-jumper into this and carelessly jumping around because he gained the attention of the wrong people. At that moment, the Paladins enter the Colosseum and start chasing the boys. David gets shot with a cable and becomes immobilized while Griffin is no stranger to their tactics and teleports away in seconds as he quickly knocks the men out one by one. Then he tells David about the Paladin organization before leaving. Suddenly an employee from the Colosseum arrives screaming for help, so David jumps into the jump scar left by Griffin's teleportation, allowing him to find his secret hideout in the desert. Furious, Griffin reminds him he left Millie alone and David immediately jumps back to drag her out of the building. Unfortunately, the police are waiting for them and the two are swiftly arrested. 8 hours later, the cops are still trying to interrogate David, although they can't make a formal arrest until the magistrate from the U.S. Embassy arrives. This magistrate is none other than Mary, who frees David from his handcuffs and tells him to run before more Paladins come. David tries to go after her to demand an explanation but ends up losing her, so he returns to the station to tell Millie the cops let them go. Millie doesn't believe it can be this easy, but David asks her to trust him as he takes her to the airport. Confused about why they're running if things are supposedly fine, Millie demands answers, so David shows her the large sum of money in his bag but evades her questions and only tells her they can't be together anymore. Feeling betrayed, Millie boards a flight back to her hometown alone. Meanwhile, Roland receives word from his team. They were defeated, as if someone had anticipated their arrival. Roland then pays a visit to William, who claims he hasn't seen his son in 8 years. William also admits that even if he does see David, he won't tell the police, which Roland does not appreciate. David arrives at Griffin's hideout where he learns Griffin hunts Paladins to kill them. Griffin explains that Paladins have persecuted jumpers for centuries and have orchestrated events like the witch trials and the Inquisition. He also warns that if they can't target a jumper directly, they'll go after their loved ones. Alarmed, David realizes Millie is in danger but temporarily safe on her flight, so he goes to his childhood home and finds William's lifeless body on the floor. Overwhelmed by grief, David impulsively teleports William to the hospital, where doctors confirm it's too late to save him. Knowing this is Roland's doing, David returns to Griffin's hideout to borrow his research on the Paladins. Griffin doesn't let him, however, and explains that unlike the henchman, Roland is too dangerous. This makes David think they should team up to defeat him, but Griffin turns him down, saying he prefers to work alone. Then he teleports to Tokyo and David follows him to keep bothering him about teaming up, but Griffin prefers to steal a car to have some fun and brings David along, showing him how he can make the car jump along on the road. David has never jumped with something this big, and Griffin confesses he once knew a guy that tried to teleport a whole building but died in the process. After David asks for the millionth time, Griffin accepts to team up as long as David doesn't contact him ever again. The two teleport to the airport, but they're too late as Millie has already landed and left. David tracks her to a bar where a waitress informs him that Roland has been asking about her. Panicked, he teleports to Millie's apartment and is relieved to find her unharmed. Millie, however, wants nothing to do with him. Seeing the Paladins approaching, David confesses everything and demonstrates his abilities by teleporting to grab a snow globe from her shelf. This terrifies Millie and she tries to run away, forcing him to teleport her to Griffin's hideout. Furious, Griffin warns that the Paladins will use the residual scars from the jumps to open wormholes, while in the meantime, Roland and his men arrive at Millie's apartment and do exactly as Griffin feared. While waiting for the wormhole to open, the boys hide and David discovers that Griffin's research includes his mother Mary, who turns out to be a Paladin herself. At that moment, Roland arrives and captures David with his electrical wires. When he's about to kill him, Griffin intervenes with a flamethrower and begins fighting Roland. To counter the Paladin's use of technology, Griffin teleports to the city to retrieve a bus and drops it on Roland, but Roland survives. Using the flamethrower again, Griffin pushes Roland into the wormhole and follows him to Millie's apartment. Meanwhile, Millie manages to cut the wires binding David and makes him promise to leave her alone after taking her home. David agrees but also confesses she's been his only love since childhood. Their sweet moment is interrupted when Griffin returns with the Paladin's machine, confident they won't be followed anymore. However, Roland uses the jump scar Griffin left to launch a hook that captures Millie and brings her to the apartment before the scar closes. David wants to go to save Millie, but Griffin starts preparing a bomb to take it to the apartment and kill all the Paladins once and for all, and not caring if Millie also dies in the process. Unwilling to lose her, David grabs the bomb and drops it at the Colosseum. Griffin immediately follows him and the two of them start fighting over the detonator as they teleport all over the world. Eventually they make it to the top of the Empire State Building, where David throws the detonator away, and they have to jump after it. In the ensuing chase, Griffin teleports a truck to hit David during a jump to a Chechen battlefield. Ignoring the war around them amid the chaos of war, Griffin retrieves the detonator, but at that moment David jumps on him and slams him into a live pylon, trapping the jumper in the electrical current. Afterwards, David teleports back to Millie's apartment, only to find her tied to the wall. As he moves to free her, Roland ambushes him with a baton, subduing and capturing him as well. Just as Roland prepares to kill him, Millie apologizes to David for misjudging everything, giving him the strength needed to push his powers to the next level. Suddenly the whole room disappears from the building and is teleported to the middle of the Huron River. David feels lightheaded underwater, so Millie swims over and grounds him, helping the jumper to regain focus and teleport them back to the old library. As soon as they arrive, Millie jolts him awake with a sharp slap. Noticing that Roland is still nearby, David quickly teleports Millie to safety before tackling Roland and transporting them both to a secluded cave deep within the Grand Canyon. Before leaving, David points out he could have left Roland with the sharks, yet he didn't. Days later, David follows clues about his mother to a house in a snowy region. There, he discovers Mary has started a new life and now has a daughter. Mary confesses she left him because she knew about his powers and knew her role as a paladin would put him in danger. Despite admitting her love for him, she refuses to abandon her job, offering only a head start as a token of her care. David leaves as he accepts his mother is the enemy and meets up with Millie, who leaves with him to a warmer place.